Hi, I'm Dr. Burns, and I'm here with Brayden. Today we're going to be talking about investigating the origins of some human remains from a local heritage collection of the Knights of Malta and all the questions that accompany such a topic.
So, how did you get a project like the Knights of Malta?
That's a good question. This project came about because I was contacted by a local heritage museum regarding their large collection of material culture like books, artifacts, like an architectural crest from the Knights of Malta fortress on the island of Malta, and 6 human skulls and 12 human femur bones. That grabbed my attention, and I couldn't resist investigating that from an anthropological viewpoint. The director essentially wanted to see what we could tell her about the remains. So a small team from the college was cobbled together, and we did an on-site investigation. So as an anthropologist, my first reaction was to wonder how the historic members of the order had obtained the skulls for use in their rituals, for instance. What's the significance of retaining human remains to these secretive rituals in the first place? And more importantly, who were these unburied individuals? Did they submit to this fate, or were they obtained in a more nefarious way? All these questions were swirling about in my head, and I knew that this was more than I could handle on my own if we wanted to do it justice. So I invited Professor Regina Lamandella from the college, and she and some of her students would evaluate the potential to collect DNA samples that might link each of these remains to basic continental descent groups, like European, African, or Native American.
So, who were the ancient and illustrious order Knights of Malta?
Yeah, that's something that I'm still learning about, to tell you the truth. It's a fraternal order, and these societies have existed in Europe and in North America and have a specific history that you can trace, similar to Masonic involvement. Were the Knights of Malta, or more formally, the Ancient and Illustrious Order Knights of Malta, was a Protestant fraternal society. Became a type of social security of the time. That is, in lieu of any government assistance at this point in the early 20th century America, this was a potential safety net for the family members of the Knights of Malta. The organization, they trace their roots to the religious order founded in Jerusalem in the 11th century to care for Christian pilgrims. It said that the founding of the religious community of the Hospitallers of St. John in the Holy Land dates back to 1048. Right, so this is their origin or their touchstone to history. The order was introduced to the United States in 1870 after receiving a charter from the Scottish Commandery in Scotland, with the first Pennsylvania chapter having been established in Reading. And a little bit of the rabbit hole of research can kind of swerve you to some other terms like orangism, right? Or the amplification of Protestantism, essentially.
Oh, okay.
It was sort of, and sometimes it's even framed as an anti-Catholic movement in my research. So you can see I found a matchbook on eBay from this local Knights of Malta station. And right on there, it says, the founding of the religious community of Hospitallers of St. John. And that's in quotes and part of, their identity. So one touchstone to all of the collection left behind by closing the Malta home at Granville, and that's here in neighboring Mifflin County near Lewistown. All of these artifacts and books and memorabilia are a very valuable source of information about the Knights of Malta. It's right here in our community, with our ability to sort of throw an interdisciplinary team at unraveling all of this. Again, from my perspective, the fact that there are unburied bones is a question in and of itself. It's a good idea to know what's in your collections in general, even through to the human remains, and we can talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But this particular home you'll find called the Malta home was built, they started construction in 1918. So it's, again, the beginning of the 20th century. It was intended to be for the retired members of the order and their families. And it also functioned as an orphanage for folks with ties to the organization. With the last of the orphans gone by World War II. Then the usage began to change of this structure. So it's no wonder that you're going to wind up with a lot of the memorabilia and the artifacts, and even this library, extensive library, would need a home eventually. And we're to that point. The order opened space for non-Knights of Malta affiliates in the 1950s and then sold the structure in the 1960s. And I believe a local collector was able to acquire this before it got scattered to the four winds. So the fact that it's intact as a giant collection, it could take multiple years to paw our way through this.
Right.
These, the human remains here are really just, one of the first things that we like to address, but there's so much more wrapped up in all of this.
So why would an anthropologist be interested in, well, I guess all of it, not just the human remains, but the whole collection?
Right. Right down to the social organization and the historic ties, just to the nation and its roots in Europe. The main concerns relate to the identity of the human remains for me, on the display in a local heritage museum. That is, again, and the museum approached us in asking what we could find out about them, I think, with good intentions and best practices in mind. Questions abound, like, who are these deceased people? How did the Pennsylvania Knights of Malta chapters acquire human remains in their secret, for their secret rituals in general, and in this case specifically, right? The display of human remains is a sensitive topic today more than ever, with federal law prohibiting the ownership of any Native American remains or funerary objects. This law is called NAGPRA. It's the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act of 1990. So, again, there must be reasons to why these bodies were not interred like most of the people at this time period. How these skeletal elements, the skulls and long bones, were acquired. That's something that I wonder about, right?
So you wonder about this even. We have a little talking point script, but I want to go off for a second here and say something you wonder even after your research. We're still not that's a continuing question that's being asked, or have you solved it, or do you have some idea based off of your collaboration?
So far, we're waiting we've taken this as far as we can, really, without knowing the particular linkages to this DNA.
Okay.
So this is part of this swerves down this pathway of, much like doing ancestry investigations. We've gotten to the point with DNA sequencing that we should be able to utilize a little bit of material that still contains DNA. And if that DNA is intact, we should be able to sequence it and get to answer the very basic question of, is this person affiliated more with one continent or another?
Gotcha. So that kind of leads into it, but how did you collaborate with other researchers for this question?
Right. Well, Professor Lamandella had brokered some analyses to be performed by a colleague in California named Eduardo, and it got a little bit delayed with COVID. And I'm glad we're back on. This case is warming up again as we've been in contact with Eduardo and his lab. He's running what he called the whole genome shotgun sequencing approach to these samples. In other words, he's looking to identify the continental geographic ancestry of these individuals. Is it the Americas, Africa, or Europe? Eduardo seems pretty confident that if the DNA is intact, he should easily be able to identify the mitochondrial DNA haplogroup. As you might guess, this is not a task for just one person, but it takes a team of researchers to address the various research strands running through it.
Where are we with all of this, basically?
we're playing the waiting game. We're waiting the results from Eduardo's lab to make our next steps and recommendations, really, for the local heritage director. If Eduardo can positively identify the identity of the samples to the level of haplogroup, then we could address the question of, the legality of being in possession of the remains, i.e. if they're Native American, they would fall under NAGPRA laws, right? And that's something that museums should be conscious of and be able to have this kind of investigatory avenue open to them. If they were African in haplogroup membership, they don't even have to all be identical, right? We have multiple individuals here that we're taking a look at. But, if they happen to be African in membership, then again, the question of ethics is back at the forefront of best practices for the museum and the community. And even if they're European descent, if we can positively identify them as European descent, then there should still be some moral reconciliation and explanation within the community as to why they're here, and what purpose they served, really, to the Knights of Malta. I'm puzzled as to whether, they were members of the order. I can't imagine members of this order really giving up members of their family, like deceased members, to be part of ritual versus interred with the rest of folks in their family cemeteries. So again, that's why the question arises. If we can't tell by looking at these skeletal remains, specifically answer those questions, can DNA help us get further along?
Right.
So during the golden age of fraternalism, many societies adopted the chivalrous aspect of the Crusaders, right? My good friend Tom reminded me that fraternal societies also included memento mori, the themes of remembering your death, or that everyone dies. That's incorporated into their rituals and their initiation ceremonies. A common motif used in these ceremonies is the memento mori, is the skull. And here we have 6 human skulls and 12 long bones. To me, it's, skull and crossbones kind of imagery is being conjured up. And of course, these are secretive. This is not common knowledge ritual for non-members, right? That's part of the intrigue. Again, that's drawing me as an anthropologist to this, because I don't know from the insider's view, what's going on and what was going on 100 years ago within this society. So those are all things that I hope we can continue to press. Obviously, we would need to have a follow-up once we get the results of the genetic testing. We might want to chat again about this and where this information might take us.
Right. You were saying that this genome sequencing should tell us about what continent it came from. What if the DNA is not complete and we can't get that estimate? Right.
So that opens up probably another dimension of the ethical dilemma, I would say, in having human remains. You're right. There's no guarantee that we have intact DNA in all or any of the specimens that we took. If Eduardo comes back to us saying there's no results, then we're back to square one with respect to their identities, right? Who are these individuals? Where did they come from? At this time period, in Philadelphia was the capital of medicine, right? And I did a lot of archaeology there. And indeed, some of the cemeteries showed evidence of cadaver class treatment, burial, meaning people that weren't interred in family cemeteries that for whatever reason gave their bodies over to science and wound up being in front of a class, being bones being sawed off in the proper way and demonstrating to entire medical classes the proper way to do postmortems, but also for surgeries and everything that was evolving at that time period. So I can imagine that having access to bodies in that manner might be a logical explanation as to maybe the how part of how do you obtain human remains, maybe without going straight to a cemetery and digging them up, or being someone who has connections to a morgue and has, what did that look like? Permission from a family for someone to sign themselves over to the medical world. So yeah, there are a lot of questions abound that it would be helpful to know just those basic aspects of haplogroup. But if we can't get there, then yes, then you just say, well, we can't figure it out, so we'll err on the side of displaying and allowing remains to just kind of be part of the collection. Or do we need to consider what best practices would look like moving forward, kind of as a community, with the different constituents and stakeholders? It's harder to determine who the real stakeholders are, though, if we can't get down to the identity of these individuals.
So hopefully a question we won't have to answer, and the DNA will come back nice and clean, but
that's the hope.
That's really an interesting question to think about, and something to pick back up on a part 2 then.
Exactly.
Knights of Malta.
Yes, we're going to have to get back to this and see which direction it takes us. So thanks for lending your ear.
Yeah, of course.